I'm pretty sure that there's some folks here that this might even be the first time that they've seen anything on Twinmotion. So just kind of as a quick recap, Twinmotion is probably one of the better tools that you're going to get for visualization for the price point. It's a very, 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 very inexpensive software for what you're going to be able to receive from it. And what do you receive? Well, you can get some high quality images, panoramas, all that good stuff. And with those goodies that you get from it, it's super, super easy to set up a lot of your images and videos and so forth. And we'll be taking a look at some of that today. So one of the questions that came up was, let's talk about landscaping. And so we're going to cover sculpting terrains, maybe adding some vegetation, some water effects momentarily. So in this file right now, I have basically got a very flat terrain. This is actually a Twinmotion terrain. You can actually import your own landscapes. Just remember that, as you're importing your files, you have the option between geometry and landscape. If you import your file as a landscape, you've got a couple of different options here under a landscape. So let's say you're pulling in a topo from maybe SketchUp or Revit or something along those lines. If you bring in that topo as a landscape, then again, you'll have certain options and you could do certain things with that landscape file, similar to what you're going to see with this file. This particular asset is actually just a flat landscape, and you get a couple of different kinds of landscapes out of the box in Twinmotion. The one that you see that I'm going to be using today is just a basic all-around flat one. Okay, so once you select on that terrain, we see that we've got a couple of little tools down here at the bottom. We can either sculpt that terrain or we can paint on it. Let's fly around my scene here, and you can see a couple of examples of what the painted terrain might look like. Or, maybe you're setting yourself up for a little flower bed over here in the corner. So you've got a couple of different options. We'll take a quick glance at both of those. So if I wanted to paint terrain, all I do is hit paint terrain, and I've got a few different options out of the box that I can utilize. If I hit the breadcrumb menu that says go to library, and I could pick up any material out of the box and replace one of these here in the four that we have down here at the bottom with one of these out of the box. Or I can, if I've got, say, a material that I like to use in my user library, I can go in and pick one of those as well. It doesn't matter. Basically, you just highlight the one that you want to replace here, and it changes to that. So what does it look like when I do that? Well, once I select that paint material that I'm going to use, then I can adjust the diameter of my brush, make it really large, really small, so forth. I can adjust the scale, the opacity, and then I can also adjust the shape of my brush somewhat. We do only have 4 options currently for the shape of the brush, but most of the time you can get pretty close to it with one of those 4 shapes. So literally, it's just like painting on a canvas. And so in this way, you can paint little paths, you can paint changes in your landscaping textures and so on and so forth. Again, flower beds, sort of gravel driveways and stuff like that can all be done using the Paint Terrain tool. We've also got on here the Sculpt Terrain. This one gets a little fancier, as we like to say in my area. And so with Sculpt Terrain, we've got a few different tools that we can use up here up at the top. Basically what that's going to do is that's going to push our brush in certain configurations, either going to, raise up the landscape or it's going to lower it. Okay. And again, just like before, we can adjust the diameter of our brush, the intensity, how forceful will our sculpting be, and of course our shapes. So in this way, we can actually, create little ponds and lakes and things of that nature around our property. Or we can create little berms and, all those kinds of things. So maybe I'm going to real quickly go through here and actually sculpt out a little hole here, maybe something of a river stream that, we'll be looking at ending in a tiny little lake here. You'll notice as the height changes, the material changes. And so we can, again, come back and paint over that if we aren't too super crazy about it. Okay. We can also smooth and even that out and, just kind of take a look at some of these tools. We got smooth, we got, noise, which makes it a little rougher. We've got erosion tools that kind of help smooth things out a little bit. And of course, flatten. So I've been talking about, adding some water effects and all to this, maybe making this a little lake and all that stuff. Well, for that, we will actually need to come back to our settings, and they've actually moved that in the latest update right here under weather. So under weather, what we'll want to do is come all the way over to the far right, and that's where we're going to find the ocean tool. Hit our little ocean tool here and turn that on, and we see that suddenly, well, we've got a flood. Maybe we're sitting on the Mississippi or basically my part of the woods during hurricane season. And so we can actually adjust the height of that water right here. If we want to, maybe make it roughly about there. We can also adjust sort of kind of how that water interacts. Whether it's a clear river, a large river, we see that, it gets a little bit foggier. We've got a little bit of caustics happening, and so forth. Little tropical pool, all that kind of good stuff. Maybe we've got some whitewater rapids that we want to put in there. So we've got different options there, and how we set this thing up. Of course, muddy river. Again, Florida is known for our swamps. So, we've got a few different options, on how we want to present that. So that is sculpting and painting on the terrain in a nutshell. In this particular file, you also notice that I've got some foliage, some trees and so forth. And we saw that little plant that I had over there in the corner in the planting bed. And so that also is super, super easy to add. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come back out, and we're actually going to go in to this side over here, and basically everything on this side is going to be your library. And so in your library, you're going to find all your vegetation, your materials, and a whole bunch of other things that we may or may not touch on in various portions of this webcast. But for right now, we're going to take a look at vegetation, and maybe we'll go to a tree. And Twinmotion comes with a good few trees out of the box. The next update, we're going to be looking at a lot more North American and Asian species being added as well. But for right now, we'll just take one of these. And with that one tree, just like that, we've got it added. And we can age it potentially. We can turn the growth on and off. You'll notice that as this gets older in age, that the root system changes. If you are looking to maybe do some root studies, maybe making sure that the trees eventually not going to run in under your driveway or structural foundations, then you can always, utilize Twinmotion to do those kinds of studies to validate, your placement of trees and such. You also notice that, we've got different things on here that can affect the tree, such as season and wind. If you look closely, you might notice that we've got, these little leaves here kind of flowing in the breeze. That has to do with the wind. If I turn the wind off, then everything becomes nice and stationary on this tree. And how fast that tree and the little leaves move depend on how much wind you add to uh, the scene. So that's just adding one tree, but that's terribly inefficient if you want to add forests. So what we can do instead, if we want to add, little bits of forest like what we've got there in the background, or in my case, maybe I also want to do a little bit of grass. I'll show a little bit of both real quick. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come into context and hit vegetation paint. With vegetation paint, we can actually just drag and drop a few different tree species if we want to have a little bit of a variety into our little box down here at the bottom. And then we can select on each one of those and determine, what the density of that species will be when I go to paint that in. And then also under settings, again, we can turn on the aging, the whether or not it's going to grow, depending on various factors and so on and so forth, as well as, again, whether or not it's going to react to the season, wind, all that good stuff. So real quickly, what I might want to do is include all three of these trees into my painting. So once I select all three trees, I just come up here in vegetation paint. And now we have the ability to set up, again, the diameter like before when we were sculpting, and just find a nice little vantage point. And just like that, we're adding the trees randomly. You also know that notice that they come in at different sizes and all that kind of good stuff. That, again, is due to randomness that's automatically generated between those three trees as far as the aging process. So again, it helps to very easily pick up, a quick little forest. Now, keep in mind, you might have to do that a few times, to really get some thickness to your woodland areas, because it kind of wants to space things apart a little bit. So you might have to set up a few different painted vegetation elements. We can always come back in and edit that, add more trees to the mix. You'll notice that as I add more trees, it changes the makeup of what's actually planted. I can also come in and delete them out of the selection. And so it's going to, once again, change the makeup of what's in there. Or I can come in and erase portions of what was painted, if I need to kind of fine tune things a little bit. So that's, again, our vegetation paint, and then of course our vegetation eraser tools. All right, so now, all right, everything's nice and fine, but that's trees. What about grass? Do we have any grass? Well, we're in luck because we've got a couple of different versions. We've got detailed grasses, which I would recommend only using against borders of assets. If you need it to kind of, again, as you see in this picture, sort of have a sharp contrast between those assets, in this case, little pavers and the grasses. Or you can do basic grasses, lawns, long grasses, all that good stuff. So maybe we'll put a little bit of grass over here around our water feature. So once again, I'm going to go back to my vegetation paint, hit up my vegetation paint. Let me deselect everything, then go back to my vegetation paint. And now I've got a new asset that I'm about to add to the scene. So I'm going to go up here to the trees, hit up vegetation, and then go to my grass and flowers. And just like with the trees, I'm going to pull down, let's decide maybe some long grass, maybe some wild grass. We've got some clovers in here we wanted to. We've also got, weeds of different kinds. We got some tall grasses. I'm not going to worry about that one. I'm going to grab this one instead. And of course, a few other options. If you want to plant some daisies, we've got daisies, literally right there. So just like with the trees, I can come over here and make sure I'm selecting all three of those and give them a bit of a density here. And when I select them again, it's going to kind of randomly set everything up. And then just go to paint and adjust my diameter. Maybe, I don't know, let's make this about 3 feet. So I'm going to hit my dry wild grass that time, maybe some tall grass and some regular long grass. Hit those three up, bump up my density a little bit, hit my tool. Now I've got a little bit there, and let's make that 3 feet. And just like that, we see that I'm starting to paint some grass along the edges here. And just like with the trees, the grass types that you're seeing are actually kind of randomly generated, but because I've got such a high density, it kind of puts it all together. And of course, make that diameter bigger, and I can cover more space. So just like that, again, you can create some really, really interesting landscape features for your Twinmotion scene. Okay, so there's one more water effect in there, and that has to do actually with your materials themselves. Do remember that in your materials, you've got water materials. And so with your water materials, we can set up pools, different river options, as well as lake options and so forth. They do not work well with the ocean effects, or in my case, sort of rivers. You're going to want to use these, on actual assets, like a pool, or if you're going to actually put a lake in there, maybe you use some modeling in SketchUp or Revit, to represent that lake area, and then you just slide that lake material on top of that, just like you would painting a wall or something like that. But yeah, those are some of your water assets. And then of course, last but not least, in objects, you've got some water assets as well. So you've got water cubes and cylinders that you can use for that purpose also. You also got particle effects. So if you want to add, kind of some fountain effects in here, we can always, come in and add fountains. Okay. So we've got options when it comes to water effects and landscaping and all that kind of good stuff. If now this asset that I'm putting this on is really, really too large, to do the scatter tool. So real quickly, I'm going to add in a primitive to use the scatter tool on that. And what the scatter tool allows me to do, we saw that over here with vegetation scatter. That actually allows me to, come in and very quickly, instead of painting the the assets on my surface here, I can actually just select on those, and it will randomly apply them to that asset. Okay. So what I would typically recommend, let's say you are bringing stuff in out of Revit or SketchUp, is to go ahead and subdivide your landscaping area into, say, your planting beds, or again, if you've got driveways or things of that nature that you want to subdivide it up into, maybe, instead of painting necessarily, use the scatter tool and then use the painting to come back and sort of do some fine touch-ups on that. In that way, you can very quickly and easily, populate your scene with some very, very nice vegetation. Okay, so that is the landscaping in a nutshell. Things like depth of field, global illumination, as the minions like to say it. And of course, some other effects with regards to lighting and camera action that in some cases I like to call it the Instagram effects. So we'll touch on a few of those. We're not going to touch on all of them. There's just way too many in this particular presentation to get to, but we're going to touch on some of the bigger ones. So the first one that we're going to take a look at, again, being depth of field. With your depth of field, you're going to go into your settings. And again, that's the third tool from the top, or third tool from the bottom, or the one exactly in the middle, if you're still confused. And we're going to go into camera. And with your camera, you see this DOF. That is your depth of field. If you want to turn it off, everything's got a nice clear sharpness to it. Turn it on, and now we see that we're focusing on my little pigeon friend that I lovingly named Mike. So further away that we're away from Mike, the more blurred he gets. The closer we get to him within a certain distance, the more clear he gets, and everything else gets blurred out. The reason for that is if we go on to more for depth of field, I've got this set up to be at 3 feet. And so basically my focus is going to be at 3 feet. There's a few different things that govern your depth of field. Distance is one of them. Your field of view will govern it as well. The tighter in your field of view, the more of an exaggeration there is in the camera effect, as you can see. All right, so depth of field is very often used for close-ups as your video camera. Most of the time it's going to be a video that you're producing when you're interested in depth of field. That's what it's going to be interested in. Your aperture is also going to be something that you're going to be looking at, and the lower the aperture, the more blurred the other areas of the scene are that you're not necessarily focused on. Okay, so I'm actually going to exaggerate this a little bit, and I do that because the last thing to talk about would be the bokeh shape. All right, so the bokeh shape is really basically if you could look at each one of these little blurred objects in the background as sort of an individual pixel. Sometimes, let's say you've got a vehicle going across the street and it looks a little like a dot, then that has to do with the bokeh shape. And as you can see here, the fewer the number here, the more sharp that the shape becomes. So, basically it's going to be the different sides of that shape. So in this case, I've got 16 sides to that particular pixel, and it goes all the way down to 4, as you can see right there. And so that's a very sharp 90-degree corner that you would be looking at versus kind of a more circular set of pixels there. Okay. Now we've got a couple of different ways we can adjust this depth of field. We can either, again, do it via manually adjusting the distance. So I'm going to change that back to 3 feet. Or we can hit up a target. So if I want to hit my target and call out Mike, then my depth of field is going to focus in on Mike. If I decide to go for one of the cars, you will notice that it suddenly, now Mike is out of focus and it's focusing in on the cars in the background. You'll also notice that my distance automatically changed as well. So that's how we can adjust the depth of field for great cinematic effect within Twinmotion. Very, very quick and easy, and not super, super difficult. And of course, we can always adjust our field of view here as well. So that is going to be depth of field. I'm actually going to turn that off because I've got something else to show you guys. Now, if we come into our little building over here, pass through a couple doors, and go upstairs, we've got a nice little room over here that I've got a couple of chairs in. One is green, one is red. And so this is where we're going to be talking about global illumination. So global illumination in Twinmotion, it uses screen space global illumination, basically meaning that it's only going to factor in the global illumination for what you see on the screen. It's not going to calculate anything off of the screen. So what is global illumination? Global illumination is basically your GI. If you go into, again, your settings and go into lighting, you'll notice that you've got a GI command here. If you turn that off, you'll notice that the lighting in this scene becomes much flatter. And the reason for that is you don't really have any lights bouncing off the different surfaces in the scene. All right, it's basically lit with whatever lighting you've got, but the surfaces don't really interact with it too much. If I turn that on, you'll notice up against this wall here, I've got a little green shadow and a little red shadow. And those shadows are actually lights being cast by the materials themselves. And so the closer that those materials might be to the other surface, the more it's going to show up on that other surface. So if I reduce that, you'll notice that it affects the shadow as well. So if I were to reduce the distance, there is a little bit of a minimum distance in here. You'll notice that it affects the shadowing also. I would actually have to move the chairs a little bit, to really make that sing. Close to the wall, we see the green and red. Away from the wall, it gets a bit more blurred out. So that's how global illumination works. Again, turn it off, you don't really see that. And your items in the scene aren't really reflected, on the different surfaces. And typically that's what global illumination will do, is it'll actually cause whatever scene light you have that can be seen on your screen, not to really confuse people with my lyrical mastery. It's going to basically bounce the light around the scene as often as it needs to well, I take that back. As often as basically whatever distance that you set up here, as well as this number right here, it's going to send those rays around the screen to bounce off of different materials, and so they're going to slightly reflect on other materials. So that's global illumination in a nutshell. You've got a lot of other lighting effects that you can do in here as well. So if you want to come in and adjust your exposures, make it a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, you can. I would recommend that during the daytime hours, keep that at 0. And then at nighttime, because it can get super, super light when you've got the moon out, you might want to, for various reasons, you might even turn off auto exposure and set that to like a negative number. My favorite typically right now is about -2. And it makes it nice and dark the way that I'm used to seeing it in my neck of the woods. But your lighting isn't only governed by what you see in here. If we go back to settings, again, lighting can be governed by such things as your location. So again, this file is, up in Indianapolis. If we bring it down to my neck of the woods, we notice a slight shift in my shadows, and that has to do with the sunlight being positioned at this particular time of day in my area versus up here where I had the scene at. So those different kinds of things can affect your lighting. And then again, you can come in and fine tune that under the lighting tool within settings. You can come in and adjust your white balance if you need to, make it a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler, depending on the season or whatever it is that you are trying to show there. Let's go with 7K. Maybe you can do a 9K. And then we go up to settings, and there we can adjust the sun intensity and reflective qualities to it. We can adjust the stars and the moon and all that kind of good stuff. We can adjust the ambient lighting as well right there. Okay. So those are a few different basic lighting effects. I did mention that we have got some Instagram models in here. So real quickly, I'm going to come out here and show off our scene with the Instagram models. Okay, so out here, if we come into our settings again, we're going to go back to the camera like what we've been playing with before, and maybe this time we'll go into visual effects. And the reason why I included this set of visual effects is because, again, it plays some subtle changes to the lighting as well when we do this. So I can adjust the color gradient, and in here under type, right now it's set up to none, but in here I can adjust the different filters that it's using. You'll notice that the color gradients for my scene are being slightly adjusted, and I've got a lot of them. I can make it black and white, a hard black and white. I can do something more artistic with, sort of black and white and red showing. I can make it a little bit exaggerated and so forth. And again, all of these different Instagram filters, as I like to call them, can affect scene lighting just very, very subtly. And as you can see, again, I go on and on for ages. I think I even saw one there, in case, nuclear bomb dropped or something. So we've definitely got options in here. Tons and tons and tons of options. We can also adjust the contrast of the scene as well as the saturation. And again, all these things are slight tweaks to that lighting. Okay. Another effect that I wanted to talk about happened to be, I'm going to go to my images so I can go over here. Happened to be with maybe some rays coming through trees. I think we saw a little bit of that on the previous file. So if I wanted to create that, one of the biggest things that I'm going to want to do is go to my weather. And again, going back in my settings, go into weather, and then going into effect and bump that spog up really, really high. All right. And as I do that, you'll notice that it starts to go through these trees. All right. Now I can also add in a light, an extra light source kind of behind some of these trees. Okay. And so if I were to do that, then let me see, I've got a light source here. Yep, right over here. You'll notice that it's coming through these trees and it's kind of sharpening the contrast there. All right. If I hit it at just the right angle, you can actually see the rays. All right. So if I turn off the haze, then you're going to see more of the smog effect. Okay. If I turn the haze on, then you're going to see sort of what looks like, kind of the what we call in the cinema business being God rays, coming from the sun or whatever it happens to be. If you're looking for a little bit of moonlight or a little bit of volumetric light coming through, maybe a traffic light or something of that nature when it's raining, then you can add these tiny little lights, which again you'll find in your library under objects, or actually just in their own folder now. And you can pick any one of these lights and play with them. You can, turn it on and off, adjust the intensity, the color, and temperature of the light, the angle, and so on and so forth, just like anything else. But the haze is what you're really looking for. Haze off, haze on, haze off, haze on. And as you can see, you notice big difference, again, in sort of the God ray effect. And you can adjust the tiling of it, for it to be kind of looking like, I said before, being sort of a dusty effect going through the scene. You can adjust the intensity if you wanted a dust storm or something. Just kind of tweak that to your liking. And of course, you can adjust the speed at how fast that dust moves. Okay, so you've got lots and lots and lots of neat little lighting effects that you can do, and there's way more that you could do that I just don't have time in this particular presentation to show you guys. Next up, collaborate. And this one is probably more so for my GC friends on the call, but others can certainly make use of a lot of these tools. So we're going to be taking a look at phasing, design options, and some other project review tools as we currently have them. Okay, so let's pull up my handy little file. And as you can see in my handy little file, I've got a little bit of construction going on. And obviously I've got a building here, but at some point it wasn't here. So I am very quickly going to come in and break that down from the different parts and pieces that I brought in. You'll notice that in my separate file, maybe in Revit or something, I've actually separated that building out by, in the case here, being disciplines. And so basically what I'm going to want to do is go down into my media. And in media, we will now find phasing. It used to be that we can create pseudo phases if we come over to our statistics tab and hit up scene states, expand that, and we can set up different scene states. It used to be that that's how we did it, but with the latest update, we actually moved phasing down here under media. That way we can include phasing as part of our media. Say we're creating videos or whatever of the construction phasing. So if I hit phasing, I can go ahead and create a phasing chart. And you'll notice that right out of the box, it creates sort of a Gantt chart looking set of tools here. All right, and I can adjust this for days, weeks, months, and so on and so forth. The default setting is that it's going to start work on the day that you set this thing up at. You can always come in and change it to a completely different start date if you so choose. Okay. You can also completely turn off the dates, and in this case, it's going to allow you to effectively do design options. So if you brought in different FBX files for design options, you can actually turn those on and off in these different phases and have it show that way. But for right now, I've got a phase one and I've got a track one. And so I'm actually going to create a couple new tracks. And maybe this one we call, general construction. Rename that. We'll say general. Then maybe this might be, I don't know, we'll call it structural. There's a T in there, Keniston. And we'll call this one MVP. And we'll make another one and call that architecture. Okay. So right now I've got a phase started for general construction, and I've got certain things turned on and off. I can create a new phase on here. I can either copy this phase over, or I can hit plus and it'll create, another one as well. Actually, that's going to zoom that in. And where was I? Move that one up here. So create phase, that's going to create a phase 2, and I can rename these, whatever I need to. I can also move these around the different tracks and expand them if I needed to. So I'm actually going to delete this track and go back to my structural and create a phase there. So now with my structural phase, I might come in and turn on the structural portion of my building. Okay. Same thing, with MEP. I might come in here in MEP and we'll come into about there, slide that in, and then turn on my electrical and mechanical and plumbing. Okay. And then of course, architectural, we'll create a phase there and we'll put it there. And this one is going to have everything turned on. I'm actually going to leave structure off because it's not going to really see structure, but there's bits and pieces of MEP that will show. And instead, on this one, I might turn off my construction equipment. Okay. And so in this particular case, again, phase 1, I've got a bunch of stuff turned off. Phase 2, I've got structural set up. Phase 3, I've got structure and the other stuff set up. And then phase 4, it makes those changes. Okay. So let me go back to more and turn my date marks back on. And just like that, I can set up a calendar basically of the work. And the more intricate that you do right now, again, I've just basically turned everything on and off based off those FBX files, but you can actually have it mimic your typical construction schedule, depending on, just what you have turned on and off here in your library. So with that being said, I can actually come out and, actually before I come out of there, I'm going to just take my slider here and move through the different phases. So general, let's go back to structural. Let's pull that to there, go to my slider. So for right now, nothing's happening. Get into March and suddenly I've got some framing happening. Get into roughly May and we're adding MEP, get into June and we're adding the facades and all that kind of good stuff. So just that quickly and easily we can set up, again, design options, phasing, all that good stuff for the duration of the project. Now if we in this case quit media mode or there, now that we've got a phase, if we go to video, I wanted to create a video, I can actually go to more. Actually, take that back. Take that. And set up phasing for that particular section of video. And I can set up as many phases or design options and all that stuff as I want to. So that's the phasing tools in a nutshell. If you want to get a little bit more in depth on that, we've also got another webinar on our website where I go in much greater detail on that. So please feel free to check that out as well. We've got some other capabilities with communications as well, and that's going to be largely found in our library under tools. And so with that, we've got things like notes that we can leave people, and we can turn it on to always face the camera so we always can see what it's actually trying to tell us. And we can leave notes. hit the little plus sign down at the bottom, and it condenses it so it's kind of out of the way. And then Lisa can come in and say, all right, that's one of my notes. What do I need to do here? We can change the color of it and so on and so forth. If you want to color code different people or different conditions, maybe you want to color code your RFIs that you're responding to. And I say that because these notes, any notes that you create, they are their own little assets in your scene. And so you'll also see that they come with little thumbnails of existing scene conditions that they're basically looking at. And so what happens is all of that information is taken out, the little thumbnail, as well as what actually is being put into that comment. And under File, you have the option to export what we call BCF file. And BCF files you can bring into like ArchiCAD or Revit or one of your design authoring softwares, and it will actually, there are add-ons for those softwares that allow you to read BCF files. What it'll do is it basically say these are the comments being that are in, say, Twinmotion. This is where you're going to see that comment being addressing, whatever it is that that comment's addressing. And then they can go in to that location, say in Revit, and make that adjustment and say whether or not it's been addressed. And so again, RFIs could be tackled this way, just general comments. Let's say you're a residential architect and you're having a quick design charrette with a homeowner, and you want to make notes. You can make notes directly in, say, Twinmotion of things that you might want to change, maybe materials, maybe moving walls here and there. Maybe they want suddenly a change in topo for whatever reason. They want water features now that they realize that they've got an extra 10K or something in the budget. And so you can go ahead and make notes to address those in your design authoring softwares later on. And so again, we've got comments, we've got, let's turn on my architecture here so I can see a couple things. Actually, no, let's do structural. All right, so we've got notes that we can leave. We can also do things like measure between objects. So we've got a little measure tool. And so if you want to know real quickly and easily what the distance between different objects are, typically this is going to, when you place this, it's going to go directly to a different surface, and it's going to be at whatever point is directly on that surface to whatever point is hitting the next surface over, and it's going to give you that distance. So you can kind of spot check things straight in the model. So if, say again, you're a contractor and you're communicating, the design and schedule and stuff to your field workers, you can very quickly and easily, not necessarily have to pull up that design authoring software. You can pull your own dimensions essentially and say, all right, that's supposed to be almost 17 feet there in between those two spots. You'll notice that again, as I change surfaces, that distance changes. All right, now that's with the constraint turned on. If I want to see, all right, what does 6 feet 8 look like? Just to make sure, we'll do 6.75. That's 6 feet 8. What does that look like, for door heights? Am I going to have enough height in there to, you may be under stairs or something for a person? So very easily I can adjust that. And of course I can move the text position and scale the scale it, change colors, so all that kind of good stuff. Again, these are individual assets, so if I were to add more, I can customize those measure tools as well. But those are some of the big major ones. We've also got probably the biggest outside of phasing collaboration tool, and that is your sectioning capabilities. And with sections, basically it happens as a cube. And so with this, we can take it and we can actually, I'm going to scale it up. Turn my section cube on there, hit my scale, and so you can adjust the colors, you can adjust the thickness, you know, all that kind of good stuff to your sections. Just hit OK there, adjust the thickness. Did hit OK, I believe. Super dark. Let's lighten that up. There we go. And we can adjust the scale there. And of course, if we invert it, now we've got a very fancy 3D detail that we can show the field guys. Okay. And once again, that's just another asset in my scene. So I can, you know, select on it, delete it, you know, if I don't need it anymore, and so on and so forth.